Right. Well, hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Thanks for coming today to talk with us about more exciting things from the Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian program. We've done a few webinars recently, and we're glad that you've come in for this one. We're excited to share some information about a new campaign for pedestrian safety, the Step Up campaign. And I will not steal any thunder from our panelists, so I'll get right into some of the introductions of folks you're going to be hearing from today. And that includes Becky Crow, who is a transportation specialist in the FHWA Office of Safety. Ms. Crow manages and provides guidance on matters related to road safety audits and the Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian initiative. She works closely with federal, state, local, tribal, and not-for-profit agencies to improve highway safety on our nation's highways. Before joining FHWA, Ms. Crow worked for a regional planning agency and the Virginia Department of Transportation. We're very excited to have Becky with us today. We have also have joining us Wayne Emmington, who is the Safety and Operations Engineer with the Maine Division of the Federal Highway Administration, located in Augusta, Maine. He is a member of the Everyday Counts 5, EDC 5, Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian implementation team, which will be promoting 7 pedestrian safety countermeasures across the country in 2019-2020. Wayne has been involved with transportation safety and planning, development, and delivery of bicycle and pedestrian projects by both state and local agencies for over 12 years at the Federal Highway Administration and the Michigan Department of Transportation. So welcome to Wayne. And we're also joined by Patrick Adams. Patrick is an active transportation planner in the Maine Department of Transportation's multimodal planning program. Patrick has a long history of social service and community programming, including managing nonprofits, workforce development, and training, planning for and responding to disasters, and international humanitarian relief. As Maine DOT's manager of their bicycle and pedestrian program for more than 5 years, he restructured service delivery, revamped the program's application review process, and developed an extensive network of public and private sector collaborators. So we're excited to have this panel joining us today. I want to get to their presentations quickly because they have a lot of really important information to share, but I also want to go through just a bit of housekeeping. As always, we will be having a short Q&A period at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions in the questions pod so we can handle as many of those as possible at the end of the webinar. We will be archiving and recording the webinar and posting that on our website. So pedbikeinfo.org/webinars is the site that'll lead you to this page and all the other webinars that we're doing. That's where you can find this material. A PDF copy of the slide presentations are already posted. I'll share that link with you in just a moment. We have an email coming to you later today, which will include some information about the archive, how you can claim professional development hours, including AICP CM credits, which have been approved for this webinar, and a link to generate a certificate of attendance for the webinar. That'll all be coming just a short while later this afternoon from GoToWebinar. I also want to mention that we have another webinar through the STEP program coming up next week, June 4th. That'll cover developing and delivering pedestrian safety projects and showcasing some examples from North Carolina. So we hope you'll be able to register for that and join us for that session. At this point, I'm ready to go ahead and hand the reins over to our first panelist, Becky Crow. So Becky, I'm sending the screen your way. I'll let you know when I've got your slides up, and then we can get rolling in. Great, you're all set.
Okay. Thanks, Dan, and thanks to the PBSC for hosting our webinar today. Wayne and I are going to kick this off. Hey, Wayne, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing good. I hope you had a good Memorial Day weekend. Wayne has been working really hard to advance the Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian program, so I'm glad he's on the line with us today. So, Wayne, I got to join a new club this weekend.
And what club was that, Becky?
The 50s Club. Turn the big 5-0.
Happy belated birthday. That's great, though.
Thank you. Thank you. So, did you have a nice holiday?
Yeah. It's finally warm up here in Maine. So we went for one last short hike in the middle of nowhere before bug season truly begins. And we had a couple of nice virtual meetings with the family, of course. My 90-year-old grandma was telling us stories about how her grandparents came over to the US from Canada and from Ireland, and it was just really good to catch up. How about you, Becky? What have you been up to?
You know, we have been busy. We're trying to get outdoors as much as possible, as probably most folks on the line today. You know, we've been walking around our neighborhood quite a bit. Wayne, where's the last time you took a good walk?
Well, this morning actually, I went for a run. We live right down the street from the local cross-country course, and so that's really great. They've got several miles of wooded trails, and you can keep your distance pretty easily. And thankfully, our sidewalk network in our city, in our town, actually connects to this local gem. And the city actually signed and marked a crosswalk across the major collector that separates our neighborhood from that park. It's at an uncontrolled intersection, so step is everywhere these days. It seems like pedestrian safety is really important now, more than ever.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I love that you're able to get out and walk, and you've got some great facilities. We have seen this terrible increase, you know, from 2009 to 2018, 53%. I think that's why the urgency is now. We really need to start focusing on pedestrian safety, specifically crossings. So I think with that, we have a poll. Dan, if you want to bring that up, we just want to ask folks just a really simple question. Dan, I'll give that to you.
Yeah, sure. And the poll's up now. We got a lot of votes already. We're asking about who's familiar with the Spectacular 7. Are you very familiar with it? Have you heard of them, but you want to know a little bit more? And are you totally in the dark? Spectacular what? That's an option too. So once we've got a few more votes, I'll close this down and share the results with everybody.
Okay, well, I think that gives Wayne maybe a pretty good idea of who is knowledgeable of steps. So with that, I guess, Wayne, do you want to kind of talk about the Spectacular 7?
Yeah, so I didn't quite see the results of that poll.
Let me tell you, Wayne, 72% of folks answered the third option, Spectacular what? So this is good information you're about to share.
Awesome. Okay, well, folks, the Spectacular 7. These are the countermeasures we're promoting. These are cost-effective and known and shown to reduce pedestrian fatalities, both at uncontrolled and at signalized crossing locations. And a quick overview, crosswalk visibility enhancements is the first of the 7, raised crosswalks, pedestrian crossing or refuge islands, rectangular rapid flashing beacons, pedestrian hybrid beacons, road diets, and leading pedestrian intervals. And so I'm just going to give, since a lot of people were in the Spectacular what category, I'll try to explain what these things are and also what they do, and then give you an idea of the crash reduction factors associated with each of them. So crosswalk visibility enhancements. This is our kind of catch-all category for some of our lowest cost countermeasures that things like enhanced signage or enhanced pavement markings, along with some minor geometric changes, such as just lighting at the crosswalk locations, curb extensions, in-street pedestrian crossing signs. So those are a couple of examples. And what do these things do? They enhance the conspicuity or visibility, if you will, of both a pedestrian at a crossing location and the crossing itself. And they help to indicate an optimal or preferred location for people to cross at. We want to encourage behavior crossing at locations where they're predictable and drivers know that they should yield to pedestrians at those locations. And so therefore these countermeasures also actually help reinforce the driver requirement to yield the right of way or stop, depending on your state law, to a pedestrian at that crossing location. They're particularly helpful at night. And these crosswalk visibility enhancements, there's a number of them. So they have a crash reduction factor anywhere from 23% to 48%. Next up on the Spectacular 7, raised crosswalks. So what we're talking about here is a bit of a ramped speed table that spans the entire width of the roadway at a crossing location, demarcated with either some pavement markings or some sort of a special pavement material. And again, meant to enhance the conspicuity and visibility, both of the crossing and the pedestrian. It kind of brings the pedestrian up into a little bit more prominent of a view. Also, reducing vehicle speeds is something at the crossing locations you see with this particular countermeasure. And as we know, if you can reduce speed at a crossing location, that's going to correlate with a less severe crash outcome should a crash actually occur. Also helping reinforce the driver requirement to yield the right of way. These are particularly useful on like local or collector roads with high pedestrian activity. So more of an urban environment, could be residential sometimes too, where speed's been associated with crashes. And we're talking about a 45% crash reduction factor for raised crosswalks. Pedestrian refuge islands, the next of the spectacular 7, these are a dedicated pedestrian refuge space located in the median area of a roadway between opposing lanes of traffic on a multi-lane road. So what do? They allow pedestrians to break up a crossing, to cross halfway at a time, focusing on just one direction of travel as they're doing so. And then once they're at that halfway point, the pedestrian refuge island itself, they can wait safely for an adequate gap in traffic in just one direction of traffic at a time, and not trying to deal with multiple lanes in multiple directions. That makes it a really complicated task. Sometimes you see a vehicle reduction or a vehicle speed reduction at the crossing location with these two. And again, conspicuity, reinforcing the requirement to yield the right of way. These can be particularly helpful for pedestrians who may have a little bit more limited mobility. If you've got folks from an old folks home right next to a crossing location, this might be something to think about. Particularly helpful when you've got roads with 4 or more lanes, some higher speed, higher ADT situations to break up those complicated crossings for you, especially if you've got a median or a center left turn lane. Crash reduction factor associated with these around 32%. Rectangular rapid flashing beacons, next of the spectacular 7. So these are a conspicuity enhancement. They're a pedestrian activated or actuated either actively or passively, so you can push the button or have some sort of passive detection. And they're a rectangular shaped yellow LED light indication. And they're used in combination with your typical pedestrian crosswalk signage or a school sign or a trail sign. And these are a conspicuity enhancement. So they're not really a geometric change. You're not changing much about the road itself. You're just trying to draw attention to this crosswalk. And they have a irregular flashing pattern. If you haven't seen that before, give it a Google. You can see it's a little different than what you might expect from a normal flashing beacon, which only flashes at a rate of once per second. These are a lot faster. They get your attention. And as one of our countermeasures that enhance the conspicuity of the crosswalk, they also help reinforce that requirement for a driver to yield the right of way. And what our research has shown is that they significantly actually increase driver yielding behavior. So we have a lot of helpful tools online, resources online that can give you some guidance on just how much. Each of these countermeasures, by the way, we have a one-pager tech sheet available on our website that's worth checking out, especially if you're going to a public meeting or something like that and want to talk about these with the folks you're going to meet there. Our RFPs, they're particularly effective at multi-lane crossings, speed limits under 40 miles an hour. We try to stay away from them when you get to the 6 and 8 lane sections, but they're great for those 4 and possibly 5 lane sections. And crash reduction factor around 47%. Next to the spectacular 7, pedestrian hybrid beacons. So what are these? These are, they're a beacon head mounted either above the lanes of a road, or they can be mounted curbside too, a little less expensive on the curbside mount. But essentially they're 2 red lenses side by side above a single yellow lens. And unlike a traffic signal, the pedestrian hybrid beacon, it rests in the dark mode until a pedestrian activates it via the push button or passive form of detection. And once they're activated, they display a sequence of flashing and solid lights that indicate when the pedestrian walk interval has been activated, and then also let drivers know when it's safe to proceed through that intersection. So these are a positive stop control, this particular countermeasure, and they increase driver stopping behavior, of course, as such at the crossing location itself. They're effective for our higher speed, higher ADT, multi-lane roadways where you have frequent pedestrian crossing activity, but maybe not pedestrian crossing activity at the level which might warrant a full pedestrian signal. So you've got, pedestrians are crossing, but you don't have 97 or whatever it is in the peak hour that would warrant the full pedestrian signal per the MUPCD. So these are something you can consider when you've got these situations that are a little bit tougher for people to cross. They're also a really good crossing countermeasure for corridors where traffic mobility is a real concern, because the thing you can do with pedestrian hybrid beacons that you can't with the rectangular rapid flashing beacon is you can coordinate it with a traffic signal. Especially during the peak hour, coordination during a traffic signal might be desirable, and that's something you can do with the PHB. Crash reduction factor on those guys, around 55%. The next of the spectacular 7 is road diets, and folks have probably heard about these. These have been around since Everyday Counts 3, but essentially, this is a repurposing of existing roadway space. So we're talking lanes, shoulders, sidewalks, repurposing that results in a different configuration of the sidewalks, shoulders, and lanes, and that somehow improves the safety based on the types of crashes that are occurring. So they can be as simple as just repainting the narrow lanes on the road, or as complex as a full reconstruction project that's actually reducing the number of travel lanes. And so what can they do? The road diets, depending on the types of crashes you're having, they can actually reduce rear end, right turn, left turn, right angle, speed-related, pedestrian, and bicycle-related crashes. So this isn't just a pedestrian countermeasure. This can be an everyone countermeasure. And the typical road diet that you see is a 4 to 3 lane. And so when you change from a 4-lane cross section to a 3-lane cross section, you don't have as much weaving back and forth between the 2 lanes in each direction. You have the prudent driver setting the speed for the corridor, and that makes a bit of a reduction in the overall vehicle speeds throughout the corridor. But a lot of times what you see is that the speed profile becomes more uniform, and that travel times end up being pretty similar overall, even with the reduction in speed. So it's ended up being a win-win for everybody there. When you have a reduction in speed, you see less severe crash outcomes for everybody involved. And it also, road diets, they give you some space to install all the other step countermeasures that we've been talking about, curb extensions, pedestrian refuge islands. And when you go to the 4-lane, from a 4-lane segment to a 3-lane segment, you eliminate a multi-threat crash opportunity. If you haven't heard of that before, Google it. Very interesting concept when you have 2 lanes in the same direction and a pedestrian is trying to cross the road at that location. So these are particularly effective for multi-lane roadways, especially where traffic has changed over time due to something like a bypass being built or just a significant change in land use that's really had an impact on the traffic that you see on the road. They're particularly suitable for multi-lane roads that have ADTs under 20,000, but we have seen some up to 25,000. Crash reduction factors kind of across the board here because not all these are the same. Anything from 19 to 47% is what we're seeing. And the last of the spectacular 7 is the leading pedestrian intervals. And these were added as a part of Everyday Counts 5. This is a low-cost signal timing adjustment. So this is at a signalized intersection, giving pedestrians the opportunity to enter an intersection typically 3 to 7 seconds before vehicles driving in the parallel direction are given a green indication. So what do? They increase the visibility of a pedestrian in the crosswalk. They give the pedestrian a chance to really establish themselves and give people who are trying to turn right and left at that intersection time to see, oh, there's somebody crossing here, instead of really focusing in on oncoming traffic as they make their turn. So for that reason, it reduces conflicts between people turning left and turning right and people trying to walk at an intersection. And it also improves driver yielding behavior, as you might expect. Again, particularly effective for signalized intersections, especially where you have pedestrian and turning vehicle conflicts or crashes, high pedestrian volumes, poor intersection sight distance, or where people are known to have limited mobility. And crash reduction factors we have associated with these are 13%. All of our spectacular 7 countermeasures, they try to accomplish a couple of key safety objectives. We're trying to improve safety awareness or behavior. We're trying to improve visibility between people walking and people driving. We're trying to minimize pedestrian exposure to crash potential and reduce crash severity. And these countermeasures improve yield rates. They encourage pedestrian crossing movements at logical, predictable locations. They improve sight distance, conspicuity. They reduce the number of conflict points, reduce the crossing distance, simplify the crossing, reduce speed at crossing locations, and reduce stopping distance. That was a lot. We've got a poll for you. We're wondering if you guys could share with us the countermeasures that you've seen most recently. What are you seeing out there? What is going on in your town? Do you have these things?
Well, we've got
Wow,
that poll
Wayne,
going.
that was a lot of great
Yeah,
news.
sorry. We've got that poll going, and quite a few have voted. We picked 4 of these countermeasures. We couldn't get all 7 into one poll, but we're asking about which ones of these have you noticed more recently. So a few more votes, and I'll close it, and I'll share the results with everybody.
Hey, Wayne, thanks for that great overview. That is definitely a spectacular 7. I hope everybody agrees with that.
I'm posting the results right now, Becky. So it's a close one between high visibility crosswalks at almost 40% and RRFBs 32%, pedestrian hybrid beacon 17%, and refuge islands 12%.
Very interesting.
Okay.
Hearing, folks.
Great. Well, Wayne, thank you so much for that. I appreciate that overview of the spectacular 7. And with that, you're probably waiting for us to talk about Step Up. That's why you came on this webinar, right? So we know pedestrian fatalities are on the rise, and with our STEP program, we decided now is the perfect time to do a marketing campaign. And our slogan is Step Up. And we are wanting to advance our spectacular 7, our proven safety countermeasures, and really highlight states and locals that are incorporating these countermeasures and really improving pedestrian crossings. So we have several different themes over the next few months that we're going to be focused on. One of those, the first one, is nighttime. And we're really going to be focused on, visibility enhancements and the RRFB that Wayne told you about. Our second theme is non-intersection, that mid-block, and we're going to be putting a lot of effort into getting information out about PHBs and road diets. And then our third theme is really going to be around those vulnerable pedestrians, your older pedestrians, your children, and we're going to be putting a lot of emphasis on refuge islands, leading pedestrian interval, and raised crosswalks. So these are the themes that we're going to be using. And with these themes, we're going to be using a lot of our same STEP resources. I don't know if anyone was on Facebook this weekend, but we had some crosswalk visibility posts through Federal Highway. But with our current STEP resources, I think the biggest difference with this campaign is that we want to highlight you guys. We want to know what you're doing in terms of nighttime. And so this is kind of just a little peek at some of the information we're going to be sharing. You can see, these will probably be on our Twitter account or through Facebook, a lot of social media going out. But then this is really what I wanted to share. We wanted to add your name to these, and how do you step up? So for instance, this may be a picture in your community, left or right. And what we would like to do is market the great things that you're doing. So instead of state DOT, it may be Maine DOT steps up. It may be the Virginia DOT steps up. So this just gives you a little peek into what we're trying to do with this campaign, is that we want to sell all of the great things that you're doing to advance the spectacular 7 and STEP through our Step Up campaign. There are ways that you can help us with this, and this is the big ask today. We would really appreciate pictures. We love to share pictures and all of the great improvements that you're making, you can send those to me. So if you think about our themes, you know, nighttime, non-intersection mid-block, and older vulnerable pedestrians, if you've used these spectacular 7, we really would love to share the work that you're doing. So there are different ways that you can do that. You can either send your information to us, or you can attach, if you're doing any type of social media through your own agency, if you can just hashtag FHWA _EDC. So that's the big ask for today. But we really want to share all of the great things that you're doing out there, and we're really excited. We think these themes are important. We want to get information out. You know, pedestrian safety shouldn't be kept in the dark. So we want to make sure that you know, we're getting the best information out there, which is your information. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick. And he is really one, you know, Maine is one of our step-up states. You know, immediately they came to mind when we were organizing this webinar, because they really are a step-up state. They've done so many great things to improve pedestrian safety. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick.
Thanks so very much, Becky. I wish it didn't come to this point in time that we needed to do this, but like most states, like most of the participants on today's presentation, you know, Maine was experiencing a dramatic increase in the number of pedestrian fatalities we were experiencing in our state. You know, beginning in fall of 2016, we began to become concerned about how our numbers were almost double what we'd been experiencing in the past. And it all began for us back in October 16. And what I find really interesting is October 2016 was also, if you didn't know this, Becky, I'm sure you did, was when EDC 4 first introduced STEP to DOTs across the country. Fortunately for Maine,
Patrick, I remember that well.
I figured you probably did, Becky. You know, I consider Maine fortunate that Federal Highway was thinking ahead and anticipating this problem, and recognized that DOTs across the state needed to begin doing something different, to begin addressing pedestrian fatalities and crashes. Next slide, please, Becky. So in Maine, beginning in the fall of 2016, we decided to convene a multi-agency work group. We really began trying to think about who had a vested interest in this. We knew that we wanted our Bureau of Highway Safety folks, the folks who are dealing with NHTSA. We knew we wanted law enforcement. We knew that Federal Highway had to be a partner, that we wanted to work with folks who represented the needs of older individuals, with individuals who had vision or disability issues. And we started bringing this group together. We wanted something that was very broad-based, so we got a lot of different opinions in the group. We wanted to make sure that we covered both the public and private sectors. We wanted to make sure that when we started looking at the governmental aspect, we dealt with both local, county, state, and federal. But we also wanted to look and make sure that we pulled together both that for-profit and nonprofit sector. One of the key partners in this was really pulling in the advocates that were out there, advocates for people with disabilities, advocates for individuals who are older, advocates for bicycling and advocates for pedestrian. You'll also see that we had AAA here because we also saw the need to incorporate the needs of drivers in all of our decisions. You know, I think bringing together partners from across our state was one of the reasons we started off strongly, and our program resonated with a lot of people. Next slide, please. So what Maine did was our Bureau of Planning, which is where I'm housed, began working much closer with our safety office. And what we started doing is looking at the statistics and the history for pedestrian crashes in our state. We really started looking at what was happening and where things were happening. You know, sometimes it's as easy as plotting it on a map. You know, we noticed a dramatic increase in our number of pedestrian fatalities that you can see here. But when we started plotting where our pedestrian crashes were, one of the things that came right to the surface very, very quickly was the vast majority of our pedestrian crashes were located within 21 communities across our state. As you can see on this slide, one of the things that we noticed as we looked at this was those 21 communities represented 29% of the state's population, but they disproportionately represented 65% of all the pedestrian crashes and 35% of all the pedestrian fatalities. One of the things we knew early on was that we had limited time, we had limited resources. How could our program get the biggest results? By concentrating our efforts where the people were and where the crashes were happening. Next slide. So we created our Heads Up Pedestrian Safety Project. One of the things we learned early in the process by evaluating the statistics and the crash history was, you know, within the media and the people we talked to, what we frequently heard was, you know, pedestrian crashes are because of how DOTs are designing roads. You know what? We looked at the data, we evaluated what was going on out there, and you know what? We found that in many cases, there was something to be said for the fact that how we were designing our environments was contributing to the number of pedestrian crashes. Other people were telling us that it's all because of the drivers. Drivers are going too fast. They're distracted. They have too much going on. Once again, we looked at the data and we discovered that yes, drivers were a contributing factor to the number of pedestrian crashes we saw. Finally, one of the things that we kept hearing was, you know, pedestrian crashes, pedestrians are contributing to the problem themselves. Maybe it's because of being hard to see at night. Maybe it's because they're distracted. Maybe it's because of drug or alcohol impairment. We looked at the data and we saw that, yes, pedestrians did help contribute to the total number. We did not want to start pointing fingers at any one place. We felt that all of us were contributing to the problem and all of us could begin contributing to the solution. So we created our outreach project that you see here on the screen, and you can see that it took several different elements. We created safety forums where we talked about safety issues. We let individuals within those communities help us identify where the problem locations were in their community and prioritize them. They helped us identify where we should focus our efforts. Based upon the information from those safety forums, we completed safety reviews. We looked at those problem locations and we evaluated what the contributing factors were. Why is it such a problem? what's causing it to be that way and what can we do. We also had a second set of public forums where we wanted to talk to folks. We wanted to talk to them about what education efforts would make a difference in their communities. We wanted to talk to them and glean information about them, about how they felt about law enforcement's level of engagement in their community. What could law enforcement do to help us improve things? We based upon the information from all these meetings, we pulled together individual mitigation plans for each of the communities. We created a plan for engaging law enforcement, and we also created a program to create a focused outreach for vulnerable users. How can we get a safety message out to some of the most vulnerable users in our state? For us, we focused our efforts on the homeless population, individuals who have English as a second language, individuals with a disability, and older adults. Those were our groups. We want to use this Heads Up Pedestrian Safety Project process to engage communities at the grassroots level and create a public process to both identify problems, engage municipal leaderships within those communities, everything from their city managers, police chiefs, the Parks and Rec department, planners, school departments, and of course, public works. We wanted those municipal officials to hear the citizen concerns, the citizen comments, and to be an active part of the process to make things better. Ultimately, what we were hoping to get out of this was to identify locations, the problems that contributed to them, and identify potential solutions and prioritize our efforts. Next slide. Thanks to our friends at Federal Highway, Maine was designated as a special emphasis state for what we were doing. We partnered early and frequently with Federal Highway. One of the early elements within EDC 5, for Maine, we're heavily invested in safe transportation for every pedestrian step program, and we're moving hard and fast towards institutionalization within our department. It's creating a need for some change in how people think, how people evaluate the pedestrian element within their environment. Part of that process for us was having Federal Highway help us put together our action plan for pedestrian crossing countermeasures. We know that within our state, uncontrolled locations are where we saw a significant number of our pedestrian crashes, and we needed to do something about it. Putting together the plan helped us take something that was nebulous or amorphous and put some structure to it and make it a little bit more tangible. Ultimately, with Federal Highway's assistance, we were able to create a path forward and have something more tangible. What really helped us was within that plan, it built in naturally the Spectacular 7. Next slide. The Spectacular 7 fit in, it dovetailed nicely into what we were hoping to accomplish, what we were doing with communities. Maine DOT doesn't have a lot of additional highway funds. We struggle financially like many other states do, but we knew improving public safety was a priority for us and had to be a priority for our efforts to address the number of crashes and the number of lives that were being lost. The Spectacular 7 gave us a tool to help make that happen. Our pedestrian safety project opened up the community discussions We learned about specific locations. What I have to say is throughout that public process, we weren't really surprised by locations. We knew where most of those locations were, but community members appreciated the fact that we wanted to hear from them. We wanted to know what they thought. One of the things that was a surprise for some communities was where community members put their priorities. Which intersections, which crossings did they feel municipalities and Maine DOT had to address first? The power of the Spectacular Seven, as Wayne said, is the fact that these are proven countermeasures. It's the fact that for the most part, these are cost-effective, simple solutions. These 7 strategies gave us tools to approach communities and begin making improvements in those areas. What we found from our community meetings is we got new ideas and potential solutions. What really helped this whole piece was the residents of those communities made their presence known and felt, and they helped give us the drive, and they gave us the focus, and they let us know that they supported our efforts. One of the surprising side effects for us within those communities is we learned that our Safe Routes to School program, that municipalities wanted in their schools much more than the school districts thought we did. We've been working since then, next slide please, to create a department-wide effort to improve pedestrian safety. We have a lot of projects going on. It's more than just what planning can do. It's more than what our maintenance and operations folks can do. It's more than our local roads program. It's more than our safety office. It has been a change in culture within Maine DOT to begin addressing pedestrian safety. On the left-hand side, our local roads program, we created breakfast training for municipalities. We spread them out throughout the state. We invited municipal folks from public works, planners, town managers to come on in for a half day of training. We lured them through the door with bacon and eggs. Once we got them there, we got to talk about pedestrian safety, about the condition of the sidewalks in their communities, their responsibility to maintain those sidewalks, and we also introduced them to the need to address accessibility issues. Another successful program we have is kind of right in the center of the screen. It's our RRFB initiative. This is a systemic response to a problem we see across the state. Maine DOT came up with a creative solution for our RRFBs. RRFBs are seen as one of the best solutions for many communities across our state, and many communities would like to install them. We know that there's an initial cost for the hardware, there's a cost for installation, there's a cost for maintenance. Maine DOT came up with a creative solution by, as a department, what we do with federal funds and through a federal agreement that's been reviewed by our local office, we purchase the RRFBs through a purchase contract, and we purchase them in bulk. We then provide the RRFBs to communities to install at pre-identified and approved locations. We provide the hardware to the town at no cost, and then that local municipality installs the unit following our standard specifications, and they also maintain it. Because of this, we've been able to create a fairly broad implementation of this strategy. The last one I want to talk about on this page is on the right-hand side, those crosswalk reviews. One of the commitments we made to communities is that we will work with you to make things better. Whether it's our regional engineering staff or the folks who are our regional planners and myself as in bike ped and active transportation, we'll go out and complete sidewalk and crosswalk reviews with communities to identify which crossings meet our standards, which crossings would benefit from improvements and what those improvements will be. In many cases, we'll work with communities to do low-cost improvements. So you can see we're really trying to approach this problem from a very broad-based approach. Next slide. What are we seeing as our outcomes? We have developed and produced and released numerous outreach PSAs, both in print, social media, and broadcast formats. We're finding that the media is now approaching us. They're coming to us to see if we have safety stories. When there is an accident or a crash and or a fatality, the media is coming to us for comment and information. We found that communities, not just our 21 communities, but communities across the state, seem to have a greater awareness of pedestrians and bicycle needs. We most definitely have had an increase in the interest and the desire to improve conditions from municipalities north, south, east, and west. One of the things I've been most excited about has been how much law enforcement engagement has been heightened, how they're understanding the importance of enforcing pedestrian laws, how whether it's pedestrians who are crossing inappropriately or whether it's motor vehicles not yielding to pedestrians and crosswalks, we're starting to get that. Ultimately, our goal was to establish some grassroots advocacy within communities, make people more aware, and become more engaged. Ultimately, our hope is that we'll see a reduction in pedestrian crashes and fatalities. The program's still new. Early in the process, we had a downturn for 1 year where we reduced our pedestrian fatalities to 25% of what they were the year before. Unfortunately, the following year, the number went back up, not as high as it was. It's a hard thing to evaluate, and we're still hoping that the long game here will result in improved safety for pedestrians. That's what I've got, Becky.
Patrick, thank you so much. But I think everyone now understands why I said that Maine is a step-up state, because you all have really just done, everything right. You're really going out there and really advancing our Spectacular 7 and working to reduce these pedestrian crashes. And I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you for that. Back to our Step Up campaign. I'm going to ask Dan if he'll put up our last poll. You've got my contact information as well as Peter Unn's contact information here. Please reach out to us. We are in the process of developing a Step Up website. So we're going to be compiling a lot of great information on that website. Again, there is our STEP website at the bottom of the screen. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan so that you can open it up for some questions.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, and we've got the poll going, Becky. We're asking folks how they are able to share some of the Step Up messages, and I'll close that in just a moment. a lot of votes so far, so we can get into our Q&A. Let me go ahead and close it now because I know we don't have much time left, and I'll show everyone what you're all willing to do. A lot of people are 40% of folks are gonna reach out to their state DOTs to encourage them to participate in this program or this campaign. A lot of folks, about a third, will follow and share FHWA posts on this topic. Becky, you can expect to get photos from about 24% of folks on the webinar, so I hope your inbox is ready for that. And finally, some folks are gonna post their own information about Step Up, so that's great to see. I'm gonna move things over to my screen now because we did have some good questions that came in. I wanna get to as many of them as we possibly can. And Patrick, I wanna see if you can help respond to the first one. A lot of interest in some of the outreach and engagement that you did around some of your program, especially in the front end. And we had some questions about whether you were able to do some direct engagement as part of that process with vulnerable populations, specifically homeless individuals or people experiencing homelessness, the older pedestrians and children. So some of the vulnerable groups people are curious about whether you were able to do some outreach with them.
Great question. You know, for us, what we found, and maybe it's some of the social service work that I had done in the past, I had strong inroads into the elderly community and support systems, as well as the support systems for those with disabilities. Those weren't as big a challenges for us. We worked closely with our area agencies on aging to utilize communications channels and group meetings that were already taking place for both the disabled population as well as the elderly population. Where we struggled most was the homeless population. We really wanted to work with the shelters and with the food kitchens that were out there, and we found the group to be somewhat self-protective. We had to prove our value to the population. We had to prove that we did have their best interests in mind. And it took time for us to generate a level of trust within those communities so that they would invite us in. And I confess that we had preconceived notions as we went into this, but part of what we were really after was identifying what was correct and what was incorrect about those preconceived notions. We really wanted to find out how can we best deliver our message and what were those different populations looking for from us.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Patrick. A really thoughtful way to do all that outreach. Appreciate you sharing it with us. Becky, we had, as you might expect, so many questions about the individual countermeasures that are being promoted as part of STEP, this spectacular 7 that you described. And I don't think we can really parse through all of them during this webinar. We are doing a lot of other webinars that are really countermeasure specific. But I wonder if people are asking questions about, do we know about some of the effectiveness of a raised crosswalk in improving yielding? Or what are the real issues or details that I need to know to compare countermeasures to each other? Can you give us a sense of what some of the resources that are out there that you've already developed are and where folks can find them?
Absolutely. I know one of our slides had our guide. That is where you need to start. It has some wonderful tables that really compare the different countermeasures, their crash modification factors, based on your particular circumstance. You know, how many lanes you have, what is the speed that you have. So I encourage you to get your hands and just go to our website. It's there under resources. You can find our guide, and that will really help you understand which countermeasures work, depending on the situation that you have.
Thanks so much, Becky. There's a lot of really valuable information. Some of you are asking about what are those specific crash modification factors and safety effectiveness of these. That's all hosted right there on those tech sheets. So I'll be sure to include some links to those in the follow-up email that you'll get later today. So you'll have all that right in your inbox and waiting for you. Patrick and Wayne, I'm not sure who the best answer this would be, but As you might expect, there are a lot of questions about how some of these countermeasures can be implemented in cold weather environments. And luckily, we have some folks on the line who have a lot of experience with snow and winter weather, especially raised crosswalks. I'm wondering how the implementation, whether there's been a lot of implementation of raised crosswalks in your neck of the woods, and whether you've had some discussions about trade-offs between that and also the need to make sure the streets are cleared of snow.
I'm sure Wayne has something to say as well, but I can guarantee that when we broach this subject with a lot of communities, especially with many of the public works folks, when it comes to plowing the snow, that is always one of their big concerns. It's a matter of working with the community to help raise their level of confidence. Quite honestly, raised crosswalks are less problematic for most of us when it comes to the plowing. It's less challenging for those plow crews than bump outs or other type of treatments that we may find. What about you, Wayne?
Yeah, I've heard the same thing talking to some city folks. The snowplow drivers probably aren't going to like them, but there's a way to make it work. And the other thing I always tell folks when they're asking about raised crosswalks, whether the concerns are coming from your snowplow drivers, or sometimes you hear from law enforcement or fire that they're trying to respond quickly, and they're trying to save lives too. And that's a valuable, and that's something you need to value as something they're trying to accomplish. There are other ways to save people's lives too. Maybe those folks deserve a raise, and maybe we should hire a few more so that they can improve their response times a little bit. Spread the love around a little bit. But we're all trying to save lives here, and it's important to value that perspective in the conversation that you're having with your snowplow drivers, your police and fire folks who are concerned about raised crosswalks. But there is a way to make it work, and people can adjust the way they respond to incidents if you're installing these for the point of pedestrian safety.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And since we had so many questions on this, it seems to be a really popular topic. I'm going to ask the folks in Maine who you all have some experience, I know, with the RFB, rapid flashing beacon, I know, and possibly with other treatments. What are your conversations like when you're talking about whether a location is deserving of a rectangular rapid flashing beacon versus a pedestrian hybrid beacon? So much interest in that comparison and the decision between those two. How have those gone? Well, what do you talk about it? What weighs into that decision in your state?
That's really an unfair question for us, Dan, because as of right now, Maine has not adopted the pedestrian hybrid beacon. We're still in exploration of it. So for most of our communities, they are more familiar with the pedestrian hybrid or with the rectangular rapid flashing beacons. It's something that they've experienced in numerous communities across the state. So it's something they're familiar with. It's something that it's really not a hard conversation for us. Ultimately, the conversation we have is more around, is this an appropriate location for a pedestrian crossing? Is it safe? Are there adequate sight distances? And does it meet our crossing specifications, including is it ADA accessible?
Okay, and thanks for clarifying that. Wayne, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add too that for folks who haven't been to Maine, we're a lot less urban than many other places in the country, and the traffic volumes are considerably lower, and our road design of the network that we've got is a little bit different than, say, a Florida or a California. These larger states with larger towns, some of y'all have towns that have more people than we have in the whole state. So the roads we're trying to deploy these countermeasures on might not be the same sorts that you're thinking about. We probably do have a couple places in our state where a pedestrian hybrid beacon would make sense, and we're looking for those.
Thank you so much. I know that things are different in every state, but it's really useful to hear the perspectives of what you're working on up in Maine. And I want to thank you all. We don't have any more time for questions, unfortunately, but the good news for everyone is that we have so many STEP webinars coming up that are going to cover different topics. I mentioned the June 4th Developing and Delivering Pedestrian Safety Projects, how state and local agencies are working together to get projects on the ground faster. I think that'll be really useful. We're going to do a whole session on evaluating road diets later in the summer, as well as a regional approach to pedestrian safety, looking at sort of the MPO, RPO regional groups that are working on tackling this problem from that perspective. So keep an eye out for those. I want to thank Becky, Crow, Wayne Emmington, and Patrick Adams for joining us today and sharing their stories. And we're hoping everyone is able to tap into some of the resources that are coming out of the Step Up campaign and really participate in that. And you'll be seeing more about that, I'm sure. But thanks to all of you for joining us today. We hope to see you again very soon on a future webinar. Thank you all.